how do you balance living in such a large metropolitan area compared to going outdoors all the time?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes you appreciate the outdoors more. Because my work life is in Los Angeles, it is, I mean, I would love to live in the mountains, but I also really like my career. So there is definitely a balance. I mean, that's why I travel a lot, so that I can go and experience nature and wild places that I really love and am passionate about. But I get to come home and still have kind of my work life. So it is difficult sometimes because I'd love to just live on a lake and like a mountain somewhere. But I live closer to Runyon Canyon, which is kind of our, LA hiking, not the same as real mountains, but it's something anyways. I can get out and get away from the cars at least for a few minutes every day.
Where have you been recently since we last talked?
Oh my gosh. We talked last year, right? So goodness gracious, a lot of places. I think Uganda, I stayed with an indigenous tribe in Tanzania. I'm not sure when we last spoke specifically, but where else did I go? I'm going to Turks and Caicos tonight, actually. Earlier this year, I was in, oh my gosh, these are times when I have to go and look at my my photos from the year to be like, where have I been this year? And it's easy to forget when you travel so much. I did do a couple of national parks this year. I spent the January in Hawaii going to Haleakala National Park, to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, Capitol Reef in Utah I went to as well. Did some time in Arizona. I also went to Ecuador and the Galapagos and Peru in February and March. So yeah, a little bit of all over the place.
Did you have a favorite of those?
I mean, I love the Galapagos. It's my second time there. I'm going back there next year for another group trip. So probably try to do that every year. So this past trip in February was with a small group of kind of travelers from around America that I brought down there. So I love the Galapagos because the wildlife is amazing. And it was my first time in the Peruvian Amazon right after that. So that was really interesting to experience that as well.
Jumping way back, you said you stayed with a tribe in Uganda. How does that occur?
Yeah, so actually in Tanzania. So I spent 2 weeks in Uganda and I road tripped most of the country with a guide. We went to 6 or 7 national parks, saw an amazing amount of wildlife, probably more wildlife than I've ever seen. I mean, I've been to Africa a few times, and I think Uganda really, was the hands down winner for amount of different species and no crowds. And, I feel like that's Africa of the 80s, now it's quite popular. And then in Tanzania, I stayed with the Hadzabe, which are one of the last hunter-gatherer tribes left in Africa that still live traditionally. So I have a good friend that is an anthropologist. She does trips for tourists in different parts of the globe where you get to go and live among indigenous people. And so her and I just went together. We didn't have anyone else with us, but we stayed for 4 nights with this tribe. There's only about 800 to 900 of these people left in the world. So it was really interesting staying with them, really amazing, because like a lot of other tribes are much more assimilated with modern world. Like they may sometimes go to a store or sell things in town. The Hadzabe don't do that. They really still live out in the middle of the bush, and outside of a few things that people have brought them, they really still live in the traditional way. They hunt and gather every day. So they have a hunting party that goes out every morning, and then women go out and gather for food in the afternoon. So we just lived among them and we did all the things that they did. I went out hunting with the men and I went out gathering with the women, and spent much of the day in the little grass huts and learned how to build one as well. So it was really incredible. But also really challenging, I think, in some ways, because you really see how much scarcity they live within. And a lot of that is because the government has taken their land. Also, some of that is climate change and really bad drought conditions. and there's just not available game anymore for them to hunt, which is how they survive. So they live in little groups called bomas, between 25 and 30 people in each group. And I mean, when we went out hunting, we caught, I think, 2 birds and 3 squirrels, and that was to feed 30 people. So that's what they eat for the day. And then the women dug up some bush potatoes and they get baobab fruit, but it's not a lot. So they really, really live in a harsh environment, and they have very little water. They're having to walk sometimes 3-4 miles to get water. And it's what we would call like a mud puddle, you know, what they drink out of. And now like the Chinese are coming in and they're building dams, and as a means to give the government money, but what they're really doing is taking resources and giving these huge long loans to the Tanzanian government, and it's going to really make the lives of the indigenous people even more difficult, because now the little bits of water that they had trickling down these streams is going to be gone, because it's going to be dammed farther upstream for farms. So interesting, sad, exciting. It's a lot of emotions that you get when you stay with indigenous people, because it's so different than the lives that we obviously have. But you see how hard it is to really live if you didn't have the modern conveniences that we have.
Yeah, what do you think about modern society as you go and stay with these people who live the way that humans lived for centuries?
Yeah.
Just thoughts on where we are today.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy, right? Because when I return home from these trips, whether it's staying with an African tribe or staying in the Amazon, I think I always come home and I'm like, oh my God, I don't need all this stuff. I should purge this. I should purge that. But it's hard to stay in that mindset for long when you are surrounded by your things, but also surrounded by the people that we're surrounded by in our daily lives, and the constant onslaught of things that we see on the internet or products that are pushed to us on TV or in newspapers, media, everything. Right. So, but I think that it's important to have these kinds of feelings to question like our lives and question our wants and needs, because we really don't need all the things that we fill our lives with. And I think for me, the more I travel and the more I stay with indigenous people and even just local people in small communities, you really see how little people need to be happy. And I think that, you know, the media does a really good job of telling you that you need certain things in order to be happy in your life, but it's really never been about happiness, right? We don't need things to be happy. We need, you know, family, we need community, we need our basic necessities. And especially when staying with the Hadzabe, one of the things that I learned, or one of the interesting takeaways was, you know, I sat for many hours with some of the women as they made handicrafts and things that they sell to people, the very few people that come and visit them. And I asked them, you know, what is something that you guys need that you don't have? You know, and if you ask this to someone in America, they might say a new car, a pair of shoes, a laptop. Do you want to know what their answer was? They said they wanted water, and they wanted abundance of food. So the elders said that they wanted more wild game. They wanted the animals to come back. And the women just said, we want water to be able to bathe our children, to wash their clothes, and to be able to not like be dehydrated all the time. Like basic necessities, which, you know, people in our world, in the modern world, like that answer is so very rare. Like we don't think about basic necessities because we just go turn on the faucet, or we go to the grocery store, or nowadays we just press a button on our phone and we get groceries. So it definitely gives you a completely different mindset and really makes you think more deeply about the things that you have in your house, the things that you purchase. which I think is really important, that we think about the life cycle of things that we buy, or that we think about whether or not we really, really actually need something, or do we just want it because somebody else has it?
Are there any commonalities that you've noticed between people all across the world? Things that all people desire, things they want, and we all have in common, perhaps?
Yeah, and I think they're the basic necessities. People want water. They want to be clean. So they want water not just for drinking, but for bathing, especially women in a lot of these communities. But a lot of the times it's not even for them, it's for their children. So it's to be able to provide for their families, for their kids, if they have kids, or, for their loved ones, in whatever kind of family dynamic that they're in. Shelter also, and clothing. I mean, I think a lot of the times when I've stayed with Indigenous people, they've seen maybe a fabric that I have, or, when we were staying with the Hadzabe in particular, we had some tents that we brought that were canvas. And so they came into our camp because we basically built like a little camp within their camp. And they saw that it was very weatherproof. And so immediately when they saw that, they said, oh, is this something that we could have? Because it's a superior quality to what we have, which is just basically bent over reeds with grass and mud. So to them, that they were like, oh, this is like a fantastic way for us to have something better that we can't make. And so I think that's like the basic want in all of us, right? It's like, oh, I would love to have a slightly better working version of X, Y, and Z. But when you're going and staying with Indigenous people and never been exposed to the things that we've been exposed to, obviously the list of like the things that they want or need is much different, because they've never been exposed to that. They don't know what it is. They don't know that they need it. And if you think about really the sociology of a human being, it's the same, right? Like we don't know or think that we want something until somebody else is like, oh, but this is great because blah, blah, blah. And you probably don't need that thing. Whatever you've been using probably works fine. But now you're like, oh, well, I need that. I want that. So it's really interesting. But I think, from an Indigenous community or small community perspective, it's those fundamental things that make your lives easier for shelter, food, and comfort outside of really any sort of technology or things of that nature.
What's the happiness level of people who haven't been exposed to technology like we have?
It's high from my experience. People that don't have internet, that don't have other sorts of technology, iPads, computers, etc. I have found that their happiness level is really high. And also so is their ability to just get things done, to stay busy, also to be enjoying each other's company, to have conversations, which I think nowadays is a lot more rare, to just have conversations with people in person and not have them be distracted by something that's happening on their phone or something that's happening outside of the realm of the here and now. And I think that, on a human level is what we need to be happy. We just need to live in the present. We need to love the experiences that we're in. And we often can't do that because of technology, which is why I think so many people that don't have it or that really limit it are happier people, because they're just actually enjoying the community that they're in, the conversations that they're in. I mean, my favorite time staying with the Hadzabe was just sitting with the women around the fire at night. They don't speak English. They don't, I mean, I don't speak Swahili. They also have an actual indigenous language that is potentially going to go extinct in the next, couple of decades. So I couldn't communicate with them at all, but we all were laughing and really having a great time, just sitting there pantomiming at each other. I was listening to them, and then they would laugh, and then, it's just like, it's great. So yeah, technology is great, but I think it's also made us dumber in a lot of ways. I mean, there's plenty of research that's been done on like the Maasai, another tribe in Africa, that when they've now been given cell phones and internet, they're just now glued to being on TikTok. And then it's pretty soon that people are caught in the trap of like conspiracy theories and fake news, because if you ever spend time with Indigenous people, one of the other things that you'll notice is that they are so genuine, but also because they've never been exposed to people that are deceitful or lie or manipulate, that the level of gullibility is really, really, really high. So then when all of a sudden they're not exposed to the world, and then you give them the internet, it's like centuries of things that people would have normally learned about how society functions on a global level are not learned. And so you all of a sudden have like a baby that is like now having to do really high level adulting. And so obviously there's a huge gap in being able to just have the mental capacity to see through what's real and not. And so it's really easy to manipulate Indigenous people, which is why governments have done that in almost every country around the world, which is unfortunately really sad.
Do you have any tips for staying in the moment? You probably have a lot of anticipation as you're about to go to all of these amazing places, or even being in them. How do you stay present in the moment when you're seeing these amazing things in front of your eyes?
Yeah, I think something that I do more now is I try to make more time, make more space, especially like when going and staying with Indigenous people. Like when we went and stayed with the Hadzabe, for the first 24 hours, I never pulled out my camera. Never. And I was there obviously to make a video, but also to experience the experience. And I just think it's not okay to immediately meet someone and stick your phone in their face or your camera. Get to know them first. Get to experience, just sit with the people, sit with the place or the destination or wherever you're going before you put out your phone or your camera, or it can be really off-putting, especially when you're around people that are not used to technology. I wanted to actually have one-on-one experiences with all the people before I got my like documentary hat on or my content creation hat on. And I think that's really important, not only for me, but for the people that you're there to interview or capture, just to actually build some sort of personal relationship. And so that's how I stay in the present. I also don't film everything. So I think if you're a content creator or maybe even if you're just going on vacation, just sit and actually experience what you're going through instead of feeling like you need to capture every moment of it. The memories will last in your mind a lot more than they will last obviously better on camera because it lasts forever. But, the memories that you craft in your mind, those relationships, those personal connections are way more valuable than the things that you would shoot on a video camera or your cell phone. I mean, when I've stayed with the Sami in Norway as well. I mean, that's hands down one of my favorite trips ever, because I got to know the man I was staying with so well. He came to visit me. He came to visit Los Angeles last summer, and I got to see him, his first ever trip to America. And I think if I had just had my camera out the whole time and never found a personal connection with him, I don't think that we would have that friendship.
Could I pivot a little bit?
Yeah.
And ask you what you think about first of all, maybe you could explain what is happening with the public lands discourse in our country right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously this year, 2025, with the Trump presidency, there has been a lot going on with public lands, with different bills like the Big Beautiful Act, with Trump trying to open up the Arctic Refuge again, which is already being opened. There's a lot of places that are trying to be opened for oil and gas. Many national monuments have already been reopened for mining, uranium mining in particular. So there is an assault basically on public lands right now. And currently what's happening is this Senate reconciliation bill, which is hoping to open up or have 3 million acres of land sold in the next 5 years. And that 3 million acres is coming from a 250 million acre map. And it's mostly states in the West. It's 11 different states, California, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and I'm missing one in there somewhere. So in these 11 states, there's a ton of public land. There's BLM land, there's national forest land. And these are the areas in which this Senate bill is targeting, because it's owned by the federal government, obviously. It's not national monuments, it's not national parks. So Trump is basically targeting areas in which the laws were written without having like the correct terminology within them for someone to come in and say, we're rolling this rule back. So like a couple of days ago, the roadless rule was rolled back, which I think most people, environmental organizations, government people, etc., politicians, probably never thought that was a rule that you could repeal or overturn, because most laws don't have a clause in them saying that this is not able to be undone. And so a lot of the things that's happening right now, especially with public lands, is that because this lingo wasn't in there, they're basically able to come in this like gray area and say, well, we're undoing that, or we're taking this away. And everyone is saying, what? There's no precedence to do that. But yeah, because most people are not going to oppose the way that our democracy was created. And as we know, that's not Trump's MO. So he wants land to be purchased by big businesses, by oil and gas, by developers, etc. And in that way, they will make money, obviously, on the sale of the land. And this all goes back to the budget cuts that Trump is trying to have for his budget. And a good way to do that is to either sell stuff off, which you would do in a big business, but then, no one has ever taken our government and acted like a business with it. And or you remove things that cost a lot of money. Obviously, we know earlier this year, there were some big budget cuts to national parks. They fired a lot of park rangers. And then now we're dealing with a lot of understaffing at places. And then it just caused a lot of chaos, because then they were like, well, we're going to hire more people, but we're going to fire a bunch of people first, which was a lot of the management of a lot of the parks, which caused a lot of chaos because programs that needed to start, reservation programs that needed to start, either started late or they didn't start because there was just all this confusion. So it's just basically caused a lot of chaos. But going back to the Senate reconciliation bill, obviously, if this passes, which it will happen in the next week, if it's going to, I think we have until July 2nd for signatures on that. 3 million acres of land will be up for sale within the next 3 to 5 years. And it will be chosen from 250 million acres, which is in those 11 states. And these are areas where people hike, where they hunt, where they off-road. So nobody really knows where that land will be taken from, but it could be anywhere within these 11 states, and BLM and National Forest land. And I know that was a very long explanation.
Have you seen any pushback to this at all?
So much pushback. I mean, I think every other Instagram story or reel or carousel post that I see is trying to encourage people to call their senators to make sure they push back against this bill. So, I mean, especially important for people that live obviously in Republican districts or Republican states. Like a lot of Utah is public land. A lot of Utah could be sold off because of this reconciliation bill. And a lot of Utah is also Republican. So if you live in Utah or a lot of these other states, also New Mexico, Nevada, Idaho, you should call your senator if you go and explore public lands, because we don't know where they're going to target. And this is land that it will never be given back, because the original thought with this whole thing was that they were going to use BLM land or National Forest land to basically build apartments for low-income people. And so in some areas, it makes sense. Like in and this was something that Biden actually brought up at the end of his term, was that they were going to take public lands outside Las Vegas, where there is actually a lot of BLM land pretty close to the city limit. And they were going to take tracts of that and sell it off for condominium or apartment complexes for low income and unhoused people, which, okay, you could say that's great. That really makes a lot of sense for it to be maybe in this little pocket near a city center. The problem with that is then if you extrapolate that, which is what is now happening in this bill, and then you just say, well, let's just do that anywhere and everywhere. And it can be for anything, not just apartments, but also for oil and gas exploration, for mineral extraction, so that we can earn some money. Now we're not just talking about a couple of acres outside the Las Vegas Strip. We're talking about places that people of all political parties go out and use. So like so many of the things that have happened in the last 6 months, it just creates a bad precedent. And as we know, that is how the Supreme Court works. Once you have established a precedent, it basically opens up a whole can of worms. So if a little tract of land on BLM land is sold for apartments, that means they could do that anywhere in the country. And because most BLM land is in the West, which is mostly Democratic, and a lot of it, it really does target a lot of places that people would never want to be sold. And it creates this precedent to be able to do it more and more. And then that can kind of filter into national forest lands and national monuments, and taking some of this land back that is supposed to be set aside for recreation, not business.
Yeah, I lived in Las Cruces, which are backed by the Organ Mountains, and that monument was one that they were taking away. And then such a beautiful place has business and development as the backdrop of the city. That would suck to be there and experience that. Have you heard any good argument for the government shouldn't be the biggest landowner in the United States? I feel like that would be the pushback.
Well, I mean, you can say a lot of things, but like, who's going to own that land if it's not owned by the government? I mean, and the problem is we have like I think 70% of America is owned by private people. I looked this up recently and I don't have the stats in front of me, but the details are out there on how much of US land is owned by corporations, how much is owned by like logging, oil and gas, and then how much is owned by private individuals, like just anyone, and then versus government land. Unless there is going to be a nonprofit that comes in and purchases BLM and National Forest land and then keeps it in some sort of land trust that is owned by the state or owned by a grouping of individuals that want to keep it preserved. It is almost impossible, especially in America, to say that the government, that we should have all this land owned by private corporations or private individuals or land trusts. It wouldn't work in this country. That model does work in Chile and Argentina, like the Tompkins. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they created a foundation that bought thousands of acres, if not millions of acres, and then created national parks, but they gave those national parks then to the government to manage. So I think it is important that the federal government owns lands that are national parks that are protected for people and wildlife. I think that is probably one of the only ways in which we can have these places set aside for the protection of wildlife and for outdoor recreation, because we're too developed as a nation. We're too big for it to really work any other way. And we have a ton of state parks. I know there has been an argument for land to be turned back over to the states as well. But I don't know that I don't know that states also have the ability to manage and fund that in the same way that the federal government would either. And I haven't heard a good argument for that as well.
Are you familiar with how it works? In other countries, like the protection of land?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, every country is a little bit different, but every country has national parks, every single one. I don't know of any that don't have national parks, state parks, county parks. I mean, they exist everywhere. And, I think as Americans, we think that like we were the first country to ever have national parks, and that's not true. So I don't know exactly how it works as far as the government trying to take a national park back in other countries. I think a lot of other countries do also have eminent domain. A lot of other countries also, their national parks are similar to ours, where they have different companies that will come in and do like the management of the national park for a certain contract date, which is what we do here in the United States. If there's a hotel or there's a food vendor, those are usually contracted out for 3 to 10 years, sometimes 20 years in the US anyways, and very similar in other countries. But so I don't know the nuts and bolts of the political aspect of land take back in other countries, but a lot of places do have similar rules and regulations around how national parks are managed, as we do here in the US.
Have you heard anyone talk about the potential ecological impacts of those lands being sold off and developed?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the ecological damage could be pretty severe depending on where the land is that's sold and also who it's sold to, which would be the biggest caveat. It's interesting. You look, on the internet and some people are like, well, the American citizens can buy this land. And yeah, sure. Okay. You're going to be outbid by the Chinese. You're going to be outbid by an Australian gold mining company. Americans are not going to be buying this land, unless Bill Gates comes in and buys something, which, there's no monetary benefit for him to do that outside of just being a nice guy. So it's, I mean, the ecological devastation is is vast because you have no idea what's going to go there. It could be a condominium complex. It could be a gold mine, like what they're doing in New Mexico. They're building more uranium mining. So that is obviously terrible for the water, for the air, for the surrounding communities, for the wildlife. The problem with so many of the things that have been happening in this first, couple of months in Trump's second term is that there are so many questions that we don't have the answers to. And there is just so much what ifs. There is so much guessing of what will happen because we just unfortunately don't have answers to a lot of these things because there's so many things happening at the same time that no one is really given all the information for. And so many of these things are just kind of a work in progress that we're like, I guess we just have to see and wait how bad things are going to get, or we have to actually do something here and now and not wait about it. The selling off of our public lands is not going to be beneficial for any American citizen. Absolutely not. We already have so much of our public lands, so much of our areas that have natural resources owned by foreign governments and foreign nationals and foreign corporations that are coming here. They are mining our land and our soil and our resources and making money in China and Australia and, wherever else. That money is not coming back into the American economy. And it's just ruining our land and wildlife.
Yeah. There's something very poetic to the land when you get out into the vastness of some of these public lands that are beautifully available to us.
Yeah.
What is a moment where you have felt that the most? Let's say on some public land that you could shout out.
It's a good question. I mean, I love the Colorado Rockies. I also love Montana and Wyoming, where you just have these big, huge, wide open spaces with mountains, like very far in the distance, amazing sunrises and sunsets. And I also love Southern Utah. You drive into Canyonlands and you're not going to see a person sometimes for a few days. It's vast, it's huge. The rocks are so many different colors. And when we think about public lands and the West being targeted, and this is where our public lands are, is in the West, these are places that if they are cut up with roads or developed, it will never be the same. And the roadless rollback is really devastating because in the Tongass National Forest in Alaska, they tried to do this in Trump's first term. It was fought and eventually it went away. And now it's coming back, which means there are these huge tracts of basically virgin temperate rainforest that might all of a sudden have a road running through the middle of it for a logging truck. These are places with high amounts of black bears and endangered species and owls and birds. And I mean, when you walk in there and you're surrounded by the trees that have been there for 1,000 years, I mean, there's nothing quite like it. So putting a road down the middle is pretty devastating.
What was this? You said it was a roadless rule?
Yes, the roadless rule up until last week basically prevented companies from coming in and building roads in wilderness areas. So wilderness areas are supposed to be completely virgin areas of wilderness. Like there are no hiking trails, there are no roads, there are no houses or development. So most of the national parks in America have areas in like usually most national parks are like 70% is wilderness, right? There's no trails. There's no, like you can usually go off in the backcountry and camp if you have GPS coordinates and know how to do that. But other than that, these are areas that are just basically left to be wild. And a lot of Alaska is like that, including the Tongass National Forest. And including a lot of other national forests as well. So rolling back the roadless rule allows developers, it allows logging companies, it allows mining and oil companies to build roads into different areas so that they can go and see whether or not they want to extract minerals or cut down trees or do whatever else they want to do in those areas. And they might not even be going to actually mine or log anything, but they're going to explore that by cutting a road. And the moment you cut a road, you separate the ecosystem. So it's just not something that we should be doing in wilderness areas.
Alaska is super fascinating to hear about. Do you remember your first trip out there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My first trip, I went up to Juneau. I went to Denali National Park. I took a seaplane to a remote wilderness lodge on Lake Clark. It was fabulous. I loved every minute of it. Let me tie the Amazon back into Alaska. So the roadless rule also is impacting places like the Brazilian Amazon, like Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, these areas that have obviously the largest and most biodiverse rainforest in the world that captures most of our carbon. So one of the issues they're dealing with in a lot of these countries also is people building roads into the Amazon. And the moment you do that, the moment you lose forest, the more you get deforestation, the more you get farmers and loggers and people coming into these areas, which were before totally totally intact, but also you have all these uncontacted tribes still in these areas. So the moment you build a road, you're exposing them to disease and sometimes the complete die off of their communities because of exposure to things that they never had before. So my first time in the Amazon, I went to Ecuador and I stayed at a place called Kapawi Lodge. It's one of the only indigenous owned and operated eco lodges in the Amazon in Ecuador. Getting there is an adventure. You drive 7 hours from Quito. You get in a small plane, which has about 3 seats. You fly to a dirt runway in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, and then you get in a boat and you go upstream a couple of hours, and you land at this eco lodge, which is just run completely by the indigenous people. It's really amazing. I spent a couple of days there just going out in the Amazon with one of the members of the community, and just the massive amount of knowledge that they have about indigenous plants, about native plants, native animals, native bugs and creatures is, more than you could ever learn in an encyclopedia or a dictionary or searching the internet. Most of the medications that we have in the world started with different plants and organisms in the Amazon. And I think the biggest takeaway for me was just seeing how the relationship that they have with nature is so intrinsic. It's just it is their lives, right? Like we talk about sustainability a lot in the modern world. But it's indigenous people that are really sustainable because there are so many different items in the rainforest that they don't eat unless it's the correct season, because they know that they can't harvest it or it will go, they won't have any more. So there's like a certain type of ant that they eat within a 2-month window. And they don't eat it any other time of year because they know that the ants then need to have their larvae. They need to go on their journey from wherever they need to get food, and they won't be able to sustain eating them unless they wait until the next calendar year to harvest them again. And it is like that with everything. So, in our world, we're like overfishing, we're over harvesting, we're overeating. And you just meet with these people in the Amazon and you see like, oh, wow, like they are so connected to the things that they eat, to the things that they drink, that they will never be in this place where nature is out of balance with them because they live in such harmony with everything that is around them. And they know that if they try to take that for granted, they will not survive.
What is the answer to that then? When our food chain for us in America is on such a gigantic scale that no one is truly connected to it anymore.
Yeah.
Anything that you noticed from them, just that people today could maybe keep in mind?
Yeah, we're really good at overconsumption. That is for sure, with our food system, with everything that we own as well. I mean, I think what I do, and I think that maybe this is something that more people could do, is you either, when you go to the grocery store, you only shop on the, the outside. You don't go on the inside. You see, but I mean, I like shopping at the farmer's market. I personally, I do like this delivery service that we have here in Los Angeles, which is from local farms. And every week I just get what was picked that week. I think we're so embedded in buying the same things all the time at the grocery store, but also we get lots of exotic things at grocery stores that are like not in season. We get stuff from all over the globe. And that is really unsustainable because A, it came from a million miles away. B, it doesn't grow here. C, it's probably not even in season now. I think if we just ate actually things that were grown locally, that were harvested in the here and now, we would all be not only healthier because we would have a better palette of nutrients and things coming into our body. We would have to probably think a little bit more about how we cooked and what we made. But we would be eating fresh local things that support our own economies, our own communities, and not over consuming, because it's a lot harder to over consume when you're eating fresh things that are grown down the street instead of from a box or from 5,000 miles away.
How do you tend to eat? Having traveled all around the world, seeing how people eat, anything that you have picked up health-wise from the different cultures that seems to work for humanity?
Yeah, I mean, I eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and a lot of grains. I don't eat meat very often. I think that if you look back at, humanity, meat was something that was eaten on special occasions. I mean, I'm a pescatarian. I don't really eat meat anymore in general because of the American food system and how bad it is, which could be a whole other conversation. But yeah, I eat really healthy. I eat, things that are grown in my local communities. I like to eat a lot of fresh fruits, a lot of fresh vegetables. I like to eat a lot of grains and things that are, higher in protein, but also come from the ground, come from the earth. I don't eat processed food either. And if I am eating seafood, I make sure that it's caught wild. I do not eat anything that is farmed, because that is usually filled with antibiotics and sometimes, and if we're talking about meat, pesticides and things like that, that will not only probably give you cancer, but they're not going to be good for you in a lot of other ways as well.
Where are the good places to get things like that? Meat, fish?
Yeah. Obviously, this is going to be different for every person depending on where they live in the country. If you are shopping at a regular grocery store, always try to buy organic fruits and vegetables. And when you're looking for meats or seafood, like, you will want to see that it's wild caught, which is at a lot of places really hard to find. If you want to order stuff, there are lots of local farms in places all over this country that you can find that will do home delivery for meats and seafoods. Some of it is obviously going to be pricey, depending on your budget levels. I think most people can find something in there, but if you're finding that you can't afford to eat these things, then you should try to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables and less meat and seafood. I don't think that you'll have a negative health effect. I'm not a doctor, but that is my opinion. Meat and seafood is obviously very expensive, but if you're eating stuff that is full of antibiotics, it's not going to be good for you if it's cheap. So there's lots of other nice healthy options that you can eat. But definitely I just avoid processed foods at all costs, I would say.
It is interesting. You can get fruit for still pretty cheap from almost any grocery store. It does make me think, if I just ate like this, life would be super cheap. So pescatarian, what is that?
So basically I eat seafood, vegetables, and fruits. I don't eat meat at all. So so that's what that means.
The people in the rainforest, is that a lot of what they eat? Are they doing fishing?
Yeah, they're doing fishing. So they, like in the Amazon, they will eat piranha or whatever else they catch in the Amazon. And then they eat a lot of vegetables. They eat different grains. They have different grains down there than we have. So like quinoa, and there's some other ones that are a bit more exotic for us, right? In Africa, however, the diet is different. I mean, they do eat meat there. Obviously, the Hadzabe don't live on water, so they do not eat fish. They sustain themselves on things like potatoes, it's like a turnip, kind of a bush potato, fruits, honey when it's the correct season. But I think the thing that you can take away from indigenous people is that they eat what's in season. That is what we have failed to do as modern society in the last several hundred years, likely, because we have had this cornucopia of options. So we can eat the same thing every day, but I think our DNA wants us to eat seasonally, just like animals would in the forest. You know, bears go through this period where they eat grass, and then they eat fruit, and then they eat fish, and then they eat fruit. So I think it is, necessary for us to kind of eat in this way where we're eating different things throughout the year, instead of just, for many of us, eating the same thing all the time, or eating too many of the different things that are not even natural. So like indigenous people just needing the basics, I think in our diets, we also probably need to go back to basics.
Can I touch on one last thing with you? Kind of following up on that, from what you've observed from these indigenous people, or just people in general around the globe, what do you think is the most natural eating window? Like in America, we're often taught the 3 meals a day type thing. What have you observed around the world?
Yeah, what I've observed around the world is that, especially with indigenous people, is they don't eat until like lunchtime. But that's because they're spending the morning going out and harvesting food. So if there is anything to eat in the morning, it is usually, something that's dried or left over from the day before, something really small that is just kind of satiate their hunger and get them through until they've harvested or hunted or gathered the food that they need for that day. And obviously there's a million nutritionists out there and doctors and whoever that would say that's probably not the healthiest. That's because they're people that don't have a lot. But that's what I've observed pretty much everywhere, is that lunch, like a big lunch and a light dinner, and usually no breakfast.
Do you subscribe to something similar? Like, what is a kind of typical for you?
Typical for me is I get up, I have a small breakfast. I usually will snack for lunch, and I will have like a bigger dinner.
And you find, does that keep your energy level pretty high?
Yeah, I think snacking throughout the day is probably kind of the best thing for me personally. And I think, to maintain energy, obviously, if people have watched any of my social media, they know I'm oftentimes on adventures, and you need to have calories throughout the day. Otherwise you're just going to crash and burn, and, peaks and valleys when you're hungry or out of calories. So
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you want to touch on or that I might have missed?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot, and I hope people are have learned some things from this conversation and gotten some good takeaways.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you, Alice. That was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on again. I look forward to chatting again soon.